Good morning. Welcome, everyone.
Welcome.
Uh, yes, to Classroom Assessment in Social Studies. My name is Cheryl Babin, and I'm here with my excellent partner, Kathy Kors. We're really glad that you have made some time to join us today, either on this Zoom or perhaps you'll be catching the recording in a time that works for your schedule, which I know is so busy right now. Kathy and I are designers of professional learning for the Alberta Professional Learning Consortium. We are now all branded and scooped together in a wonderful team of APLC, or called the Consortium. So thank you for being here. Hopefully you've enjoyed a few different sessions this week, and we really hope that you will walk away with some tools that you can use today. I would like to start with a land acknowledgement, and it's Kathy is coming to you from near the Red Deer Ponoka region, and I'm coming from Calgary. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the traditional Blackfoot territory that I'm coming from today. This is a picture that I took at the Bow River, very close to my home. I live in Southeast Calgary, and it's been a special place that I've enjoyed every day this summer. And I hope that you've also found a way to connect to the land in a meaningful spot or a meaningful way, whether that's a potted plant that you can grow, or a balcony or a patio, or maybe even a farm like Kathy has, vast land. We would like to, as we tackle this new curriculum and we start to think about what opportunities we can create for our students to learn and to grow and to have solid relationships with the land, I would like to honor and thank the traditional Blackfoot peoples who have been home and caring for this land since time immemorial. Oh, in this area, it's home to the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai nations. To the west, we have the Ithika Stoney Nakoda Nation, which includes the Chiniki, Bears Paw, and Goodstoney First Nations. This incredible area is also home to the Tsuut'ina Nation and the Otipemisiwak Métis government of Métis Nation within Alberta District 6. Calgary is divided between District 5 and 6. And so I just wanted to take that moment and honor that land, and thank you all for being here and doing that with me. All right, diving right in. As teachers, we are always thinking about assessment. We need to think about how best to meet the needs of our students. We cared very deeply about supporting them through learning this new curriculum. And so we have an overarching question that we really wanted to tackle through this session, but also in an ongoing way throughout the year. How might classroom assessment look as we plan to assess and report on the social studies learning outcomes? And so we know that we have to think about not only how do we design the plan and the learning for these outcomes, but what counts as evidence of learning. We really want to think about, how do we know if students are learning, and what do they need to show us, or what do we need to hear, or what do we need to see from our students as they're engaging in these experiences with us in the classroom. We are going to talk a little bit about what counts as evidence. We'll then shift into planning for evaluation. So we're going to go between that place of like what happens in the classroom, and then to that spot, we all know it. It's that place where you're like, okay, now we have to evaluate, and we have to give them a level of achievement or a mark or a grade in a reporting context. So when it's time to get to report cards, how do we pull all these things together and assign them something that we feel comfortable with based on the evidence of learning that we've been able to see? Then Kathy and I have worked on some examples of classroom assessment that we'd like to share with you. And we'd really like to have some conversations and deal with together, tackle some of the questions and responses that you might have going into this new curriculum. We are teachers. We are elbows up in learning this new curriculum, trying to think about all of the different perspectives and to think about the learners in our care. So, these pieces are, there are attempts at really good pedagogy, and they're going to be imperfect. And so if you see something that you want to shift or change, or if you have suggestions, we are very open to that. And we want to work together to make things really great for students. And so for students, but also for you, we want to support you as teachers in this work. So please let us know how it's going for you. Okay, where's the stuff? Here's the stuff. Where do we find these resources? Kathy and I are part of a social studies committee within APLC, and we've been working through last year and a lot this summer since the curriculum was finalized to create a social studies toolkit for all of us to use and draw from. And so if you um, take a look in the chat, there's a couple ways that you can access this toolkit. The link for it is in the chat, but you can also use the QR code to access it if you want to follow along with us as we look at some of the examples. We know that we have members here from teachers from kindergarten through grade 6 and perhaps even beyond. And so if you're a leader or if you're a teacher and you want to use any of these materials, we encourage you to do so. So let us know that you can get through to that curriculum. It's posted on the APLC website as well. So that will be there for you to get to.
Okay. So, like Cheryl just said, everything that we're showing you is kind of clips out of that. So, if you're looking at any of those pieces in that assessment section, you're going to see some of the stuff that we're sharing with you more just to kind of walk through some of our thinking and where we came through with that. So one of the most common questions we have had since the social studies has come out, but even when it was just math and ELAL that came out, was about assessment and how are we making sure that we are doing what Alberta Ed is asking of us. And so part of that is, of course, the evaluation. So what goes into that collection of evidence? So we want to start with maybe 2 truths and a lie about what it is that we're trying to kind of make sure that our thinking is going toward as we're looking at this. So one of our truths, of course, is that effective assessment itself is a photo album. It's not just about I've seen one thing and I know what's going on. We're constantly, as teachers, collecting that evidence, whether it's through the products that we have our students create, but also their conversations and, of course, the observations that we're making with our students. And when it comes to evaluation, it also includes that triangulated evidence, that making sure that we're ready to report, that we're thinking about different stages of how the students have grown and also what they're showing us as they go through those stages. Another truth, of course, is that that photo album doesn't need to look the same for all of our students. They're working toward the same goal, but they can get there in different ways. And we also know that we need to personalize some things for some of our students, thinking about their needs. But the criteria for that success is what we're saying is how we're getting to that. So this allows for that differentiation that, of course, we know is a huge component of our teaching nowadays.
And here comes the lie, 2 truths and a lie. The lie is every unit must end with a test that includes all the KUSPs. Nope, that's false. Now, Alberta Ed will tell us that each CUSP needs to be addressed, but each CUSP does not require a summative unit test at the end. It is not a requirement for students to memorize all of the knowledge and reenact all of the skills in that final test if the evidence of learning has already been captured prior to that through varied learning experiences. So we're here to show you wide-ranging ways that you can gather that experience and that evidence in a variety of ways And yes, you can still have a summative unit test, but it doesn't need to include every single thing that you've done um, through the course of that unit or that learning until the end. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about planning for evaluation. And when Kathy and I were looking at the outcomes and thinking, what are the things that we really want to consider? And we know that we are trying to grow really good humans out of this process. And by saying that, what I mean is that we looked at the social studies overview and all of the things that we hope our students will gain from being in our classes and being in our schools, and how they can benefit from learning in a social studies context. And so we thought, okay, yes, we need to consider achievement of that learning outcome. We also know that we want students to develop competencies throughout the course of their time with us. And so we're going to be aware of that development of competencies as we go. And we're also thinking about the values and the dispositions and the attributes um, that they are growing as individuals when they are experiencing the curriculum and all of the learning that takes part. So if you're curious about what these mean, we're going to walk you through an example. We pulled from a grade 4 outcome and we've pulled different parts of it out so we can just give you an example of what we mean by each of these pieces. In planning for evaluation, we know that across Alberta, there are many, many different reporting processes and methods. Some of you have real-time reporting and you don't actually have a report card that goes out anymore. I held it like a card. Did you see that? I was like, here's the old report card. But we also know that sometimes there are schools and districts that are working with reporting timelines where you do need to give out a grade or a level of achievement. And we also know that those levels of achievement, sometimes we have schools that are using number systems, letter systems. We've got all kinds of different things. So our goal for these materials was to show that the resources we've provided, we hope will be effective evaluation tools within any of those systems. We think that you can take these ideas and use them in your context. Kathy, please jump in if there's anything you want to add. Or you can cut me off with a hook if I'm talking too long. So when it comes to planning for the evaluation, we know that the difference between assessment for learning, which takes place during that learning, that's the formative time. Evaluation is also known as that assessment of learning. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, like when we have to gather all the evidence in order to determine and report a grade or level of achievement for those outcomes. So please notice that I use the word determine and not calculate. They're quite different because you're using your professional judgment and all of the evidence that you have been able to gather throughout. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the competencies. Some of you might be thinking, wait, what? I have to evaluate the competencies as well? Well, Alberta Education tells us that we are not required to formally evaluate and report on competencies separate from those learning outcomes. However, we know that we are constantly giving students feedback on those pieces as it relates to the learning outcomes and the experiences. So we're teaching kids how to manage information and how to enhance their communication skills. We are supporting them to collaborate. Yes, of course we are. We're doing all of those things anyway. And so we wanted to bring those to the forefront and show how you might choose one or two of those competencies in each learning outcome so that you could really highlight it, be explicit about teaching those skills in that context. And we've got a direct link to the competencies progressions there if you would like. Kathy, do you mind please popping that link into the chat for us?
Sure.
And
The other thing to be aware of is just that with the social studies, if you've looked into that initial information and that sort of thing, and as you're going through, is even though we're working on all of the competencies, one of the interesting things is that critical thinking has been pulled out to say this is a huge competency for the social studies. So it is even spent time to making sure that that is really, really focused on. So, okay, you got it, Cheryl. Thanks.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
okay. So for each learning outcome per grade, this is what you will find in the materials. Some of you have probably already opened it and have left us because you're just reading, but we recognize that. We're going to have the first part, which is about those enduring and transferable goals. The main goal of the outcome, the competencies for focus, and the essential takeaways. So we're going to give you like a part one overview. Then we're going to dig into performance indicators for the learning outcome. What will you notice? What will you see? It's a simple, holistic rubric that we hope will help to evaluate and determine proficiency. How, to what degree have the students achieved the outcome? And so we've created a rubric for each of the learning outcomes for you. We really value the triangulation of assessment evidence, examples of products, conversations, and observations to use as evidence. And so for each learning outcome from kindergarten to grade 6, we have generated some ideas of what kinds of products you might have students create, what kinds of language might you listen for, what are some phrases or some things that you might hear, and what are some things that you would look for. And so for each of those, we're going to break that down in a grade 4 example right away. Okay, so in the teal section, that sounds like a baseball stadium. In the teal section, we have the goals of the learning outcome. What will you prioritize and emphasize? And so we were really thinking about this as an overarching way. What learning will be nurtured as students work toward the learning outcome? Okay, what will they come to understand? And so the grade 4 outcome that we are addressing is students examine significant historical events that contributed to the formation of the country of Canada. It's in the organizing idea, time and place, and the guiding question is, how did colonies influence the formation of Canada? Okay, so that learning outcome is grade 4, time and place. And so we're thinking, okay, we know that students are going to learn about how the land on which we currently live came to be the country called Canada. They will learn about colonization, and that is when one country forcibly overtakes the land that's already occupied. Okay, they will learn that Britain and France enforced their own belief systems, religions, leadership, and ways of life on the Indigenous people. It happened around the world, including here in Canada. So that's the learning that is the overarching piece that we hope will move forward with them as they continue on. We went into New Learn Alberta and we thought, okay, let's connect and see which competencies have already been tagged to this particular learning outcome. And often there are quite a few. And as a teacher, we find that challenging to think about all of them simultaneously. Many of them you're doing anyway. So what Kathy and I have done is we've selected one or two from each of those areas that we think best fit the outcome in a really specific way. So over the course of the year, you'll be addressing all of them in a way that makes sense to your practice. And so for this particular one, there's a lot of information to manage. So we want students to reflect on gathering how they're getting information and trying to organize it. That's a really big step for grade 4s. And so we think that that's one of the competencies that you will focus on. And then when it comes to critical thinking, that was the other piece that was already selected and tagged to this learning outcome in New Learn Alberta. I pose questions to analyze information or evidence, and I also consider perspectives that might not fit with my understandings. So these are two pieces that we identified in this outcome as being ones that you may want to focus on. If you disagree, that's okay. You can choose the ones that you want or tackle it in a different way. This is just an opportunity to give you a step that might be helpful in your practice. The other thing is that when we look at the social studies overview, it's very clear that our goal is to support students to become active and responsible citizens. So what in this learning we hope to help them value? And so we have written a statement that talks about, in this case, that colonization was done primarily by European countries as they worked to expand their influence by claiming land that was already home to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit before Europeans arrived. And why do we value this? Because we believe that deepening this understanding supports truth and reconciliation. And so that's a message that we hope to instill as we prioritize and emphasize the learning through this outcome. Okay, so then we'll go into part 2 of the documents. Here's what we've created as a performance indicator for that particular learning outcome. And again, you can see in the middle of the screen, the students examine significant historical events that contributed to the formation of the country of Canada. So we have decided to use 3 levels of achievement: proficient, partially proficient, and not yet. And these are larger categories than some of your reporting systems might require of you. But we know that sometimes it's really difficult to distinguish the difference between, proficient and extra proficient, or or good and satisfactory, and sometimes those levels are difficult to distinguish in terms of the body of evidence. And so we created these categories thinking about language that was strength-based and positively framed. And we also linked it directly to the verb that stands out in the learning outcome. So for example, students examine significant historical events. Well, what does examine mean? So we broke that down and we tried to articulate what that examination means. And so at a proficient level, these are the things that we believe students will be able to show. They will be able to explain causes or challenges and contributions that made Canada's formation. They'll make connections between settlement and how that shaped the country, for example. And they will consider perspectives of different groups of people involved in that time period. They will also demonstrate or explain why events were significant for the development of Canada. And it doesn't say that they have to do that for every single event. It's more of a general application of that thinking and learning. Partially proficient. Now, this rubric doesn't always line up exactly because we wanted it to be really useful and show a distinction between those categories or those levels of achievement. The simplified descriptions, maybe making a connection to an event and its development, but we're not quantifying it. We're not saying, oh, you have to do 2 connections to be partially proficient and 4 connections to be proficient. It's not about that at all. It's about the way that they are understanding and being able to examine it, right? When we go to the not yet category, we also made sure to really look at this from a strengths-based way. This is not a deficit look at what they have learned so far. The language in the not yet categories are specifically designed to show how students are developing the attributes and the abilities that will allow them to successfully examine an event as they progress along their own learning progression. So they're starting to share ideas and examples about Canada, or maybe they are able to look at maps and visuals to talk about places. And that's a great starting point for a student that's working along this continuum to be able to achieve the learning outcome. Showing curiosity about how events helped. Some of those dispositions are things that are attributes to that student's learning and that will help them in the future.
And part of the reason that we chose to share these documents with you as documents that you can make copies of is also then hopefully if this does not fit your rubric style that you need for your school or how you're working through your classroom, then you can easily just make a copy of this and then take it and make it into your own. So again, that's part of the reason that we chose to share them not as PDFs, but as documents that you can work with.
So just to highlight the most important parts about what makes this rubric different from others that you have written and seen, it's intended to help teachers. This is a teacher document to help you determine a grade or a level of achievement, adjust or modify it, as Kathy said, and that not yet is intentionally written in a strength-based way. And so we hope that that will really support you and your students, and comments that you will make and conversations that you have. So we hope that that rubric will be useful to you. The third part of what you will see in these documents is what counts as evidence of students' learning. So even during your formative or assessment for learning, you will look at triangulated evidence that includes conversations, observations, and products or performances or portfolios of evidence. And so what we've tried to do for each outcome is pull some of these ideas for you. This text is small on the screen, but I hope that makes you think, oh, it's full of good things, instead of that text is way too small for me to read on the screen. We have gathered conversational evidence. So actually, if we can keep going through, and we'll pop up an example of conversational evidence might be, people came to Canada for farmland and a better life. If you hear a student say that, you talk about that, that counts as assessment evidence. Or maybe you see somebody, oh, there's Kathy. She's using vocabulary really effectively. I heard her say migration and treaty when she was talking in her group. That counts as well. And then maybe some of the products, or maybe they make a stop motion map that has, little pinpoints, and then an audio sharing excellent details about what happened on that settlement. Or maybe you're connecting to how we do social studies and enhancing some roles, or getting students to take part in trying to take on different perspectives. And so we hope that these triangulated evidence pieces will offer you some support. Okay, I have talked a lot. Shall I pass it over to you, partner?
Sure. So in those documents that we've shared, and we just reshared the link in case you didn't get that at the beginning. So you're going to go into that toolkit, go to page 5, which has the assessment. There's 2 different links. So the first link is the one that we're talking about right now, the effective evidence. And then within that slideshow, there is these pages. So you will have a direct link to each of the learning outcomes for kindergarten through grade 3, which of course are mandatory implementation. And then you will also have the second page, which for those of you that are choosing to do 4, 5, and 6 this year, or knowing it's there, and if you want to go and have a look, even if it's not on your plan right yet. So we have what Cheryl walked you through. We have one for each of the learning outcomes, and we're hoping that that gives you a really good start to help you to think about your assessment, as well as taking all those KUSPs and thinking about them through a more generalized focus, I guess, and backing away a little bit instead of being so focused on all the little pieces. And then in the end, it kind of looks more like a checklist instead of that holistic view, which is what we want you to be able to work with. So again, those are in that toolkit, and then that way you have that opportunity to make copies of things that work for you. Please feel free to share them with teachers in your building, and then adapt them and change them as you see fit. Cheryl and I are always up for finding out some feedback on things. So if there's things that you think we could tweak or add, or you've got a really great idea that we've missed, we would love to hear that. So we're ready to go to the second piece of what we wanted to share with you. So those is kind of again, that generalized overview. What are some ideas behind evidence? we want to kind of look at that's sort of that simplified version. We need to now step into what might be a more detailed version of this. What might those assessment examples look like? Some of you may have joined us back in January, I believe it was, of this year. We actually helped with an Alberta Education presentation when it was still in the pilot stages. And so we did something very similar to this with Alberta Education in that we took some very specific examples that they were looking for and made them into assessments. So it may be familiar to some of you, but now it is no longer working with those draft curriculum, it's working with the finalized curriculum. So we have an example in that piece that you're going to be looking at that would go for each grade to give you some ideas on how to flesh out some more detailed assessment. And so you're welcome to look at each of those, but we're going to share with you some specific examples. We won't share all of the examples. You're fully capable of going and looking where you need to look, but we do want to pinpoint some of the reasons that we did things in certain ways to share with you. So some of what we would look at when we're doing examples is the whole idea that sometimes when we're looking at a learning outcome, it might make sense just to take that whole entire row. We can do an assessment that's going to include all the knowledge pieces. It's going to include that understanding that's there or the multiple understandings that are there, and it's going to include our skills and procedures. And from that, we can take all that information and put it into maybe a learning experience. And typically that leads into an assessment experience as well. So the first example that I'm going to show you is from the kindergarten one, the leaders in our community. Just quickly before we do that, or sorry, as we're doing that, so when you're looking at the document, you're going to see this at the start of each of the documents. And so what we did is we went and looked at the CUSPs and said, what are we taking from this? So in some cases, like the kindergarten one, you're going to see all of the CUSPs. Every piece of knowledge, every understanding, every skill and procedure is part of this assessment. And again, that's why we're showing it to you as a role. But definitely in some of the cases, you're going to see that there's only pieces of what is directly from Alberta Ed. You're also going to see that in a lot of the social studies, there's the words for example, and we just want to remind you from Alberta Education, if you see for example in your outcomes or in your CUSPs, and particularly they're going to show up in the knowledge section, those are optional illustrative examples. So you might do one or two of them. You might do all of them if you really see fit. You might introduce your own because it suits your school, your students, your needs. And so those four examples are there. The outcome is what needs to be assessed and reported on by Alberta Ed, not all of those tiny little for examples and that sort of thing. And of course, just as you'll see there, if you see the word includes, then they are expected to be taught all of the pieces that they've used there. So just a reminder on that. So in the kindergarten example, you're going to see parts where we've maybe even backtracked a little bit and thought about, what might get us to the assessment. So in a lot of cases, you're going to see more of a learning experience of how we might set this up. It's not necessarily the full details of all the things that you would do, but it definitely gives you an idea of where we came from. So in the kindergarten one, we're trying to lead students to understand the concept of a leader and leaders in their communities. So of course, kindergarten, but I'm a swear by read alouds no matter what grade. But of course, in kindergarten, we're going to use those read alouds to help us have those conversations and common experiences. So I've given you a list of some possible read alouds that you might work with students, some questions that you might use for each of them. Obviously, it's not all of the questions, and you're going to fine tune that. And then they're going to talk about some community leaders. So as we're reading these books, who in our community does things that you think of leadership? So that's going to be students in their own classroom that are leaders. It's going to be the teacher in the classroom. It's going to be the principal of the school, and it's going to lead to coaches. And of course, maybe a mayor in your community, or, whatever it is that you have as leadership in your community. So you're going to expand that. And then from there, it's going to take you to the assessment. What would a class book look like for our kindergarten class? So we've, thought through that. And then, of course, what would be some assessment that might help you? So this is fine tuning this assessment down into, in this particular case, it seems like they either get it or they're working on getting it. So it's a yes and not yet. And can they identify a community leader, and can they tell what the role is of that community leader? That allows for differentiation. They can choose different community leaders. They're putting it into their page, and of course, working towards showing you and other people, teaching other people what they've learned.
I like the way that that one really aligns with the values and the takeaways that we had outlined in the kindergarten example that you'll see in the toolkit. So thanks, Kathy. Another way that you might approach addressing all of the cusps from a learning outcome is to possibly group them according to how you feel that they connect together. So you might take a few pieces of knowledge, it's important that we look across and see that they're not done just as knowledge discrete from the skills and understandings. They're really meant to be connected together and to link across in that way. So if you gather some of the knowledge components, there will be a corresponding understanding and skills and procedures, but you do get to decide how you might want to cluster or group them. So you may come up with, 2 or 3 or more different assessment or learning experiences to address the cusps in the outcomes. For this demonstration, or how we would show this, we are taking you to grade 5 in the example assessment tasks. And this outcome comes from time and place. Students examine how geographical features and environmental changes contributed to the settlement and trade of ancient civilizations. So for this one, we've got 2 different examples, and I'll just give you a few snapshots of one so that you can see what it might look like for your grade 5s. And so this one starts with a question where you pose to the students, okay, hold on a second. Who chose the best place to build a civilization? And what makes best really the best? What's the criteria for best? And how do we know that? And so as teachers, you would then co-create that criteria for, well, what do you think is the best place to build a civilization? The likely answers are most likely going to actually come right out of the knowledge pieces. They're going to talk about water, has fertile soil, has a moderate climate, and is a good place for traveling to trade goods or to make trades or transport things. And so you can help students to get to that place, co-creating that criteria. And then when they start to examine and look at different civilizations, it's all with the thinking that they have to decide which one had the best location in terms of that civilization. So you could use a tracking chart that has the criteria for the best places on the left-hand side, and then maybe you choose to look into 1 or 2 or 3 of the ancient civilizations. And so when they're looking at Egypt, they're not just learning about every possible thing about ancient Egypt that there is to know. Their inquiry, their research is based on the question that they're trying to answer, which is who has the best location. And so in that tracking chart, they would say, okay, did Egypt have an abundance of water? And then they would write their evidence or their proof in that way. And this could be a giant chart on the wall if you wanted to do this together with students, or maybe it's a 11 by 17 that they are mapping out as they go through resources and encounter different videos, but they're kind of capturing all of this, which in turn is helping them to develop the competency of managing information. Then comes time for the actual assessment of that learning. And so they have to then make a claim, and they have to support their answer with facts and evidence that they have gathered. We've also provided some essential vocabulary that we want them to include in their claim. And it's okay to give them these words so that you can see how they use them in context. Can they talk about innovation? Well, how did that play into it? And so the third part of this is to ask students, well, what question do you have now that you've done all of this learning? Critical thinking is really about being able to pose relevant and provocative questions that come from deep learning. The better your question is, the more you sort of know and understand. And so this assessment task tries to put all of those things together. We've also wanted to show that you can have students share their learning in various ways because we want to model differentiated assessment practices. Perhaps they could write their claim and support in a paragraph form. That's pretty standard and traditional, but maybe they plan, practice, and then create an audio recording where they have to speak their claim and offer their support. Or maybe they draw and annotate a map that they can explain to you. And so sometimes if you offer those choices, you can put students into group when it comes time to assess them so that you're not having 31 people line up to explain their map or diagram for you. There's ways that you can offer choice and it can spread out the assessment processes a little bit. So that's just one example. We have also added a rubric in, and we chose to use a rubric that was really in that assessment for learning piece so that what does success look like in this single point rubric in the center, three key criteria for success, and then a spot to write some strengths. What did the student do really well in supporting their claim, using vocabulary, and thinking critically about the question? And what are some areas that a student could continue to use or transfer to the next learning experience as a stretch? We used the language from Shelley Moore, who is a wonderful advocate for inclusive education. And she talks about strengths and stretches, and don't we all have them? So that's how we decided to apply those to our assessment tools. Another way that you can address KUSPs is to tackle multiple learning outcomes at the same time. We know how busy and how challenging it is in terms of time. And so as teachers, we need to be efficient and we need to try to combine and cluster wherever possible. And so it's okay to gather organizing ideas or learning outcomes from different places. It can be two from social studies, two different organizing ideas. If you see links and connections, by all means, cluster them together and design it into a task. And so here's an example of how we did that. This one is comes from two citizenship outcomes. Students examine civic participation in Canada and the second citizenship outcome as well. So let's take a look at that task. This one asks students to give a report card on a selected action that a citizen has chosen to do. And so there's a little bit of a video menu where they can go through and take a look at all of these short clips of videos of people taking action. And then they are asked to rate those actions in terms of their success. So on that scale, sort of that dashboard scale from 1 to 4, 1 is highly successful action and 4 is highly unsuccessful action. And so this does not include all of the questions that we've provided, but it really gives you a sense of, okay, give them a report card indicator and then justify or explain the benefits or the drawbacks of that action taken. So we really want kids to be activating that critical thinking and saying, okay, this Heritage Minute showed this participant or this citizen standing up for the rights of women to vote. Was it successful? What were the benefits? Were there any drawbacks? Was it dangerous for her? Did the impact have the desired result? So we want them to really think critically about those ideas.
The last example we're going to share with you is the idea of combining cross-curricular. So you're taking, from a learning outcome in social studies, and this particular example is grade 2, and there's a perfect match to go with the science. So that whole efficiency as a teacher and trying to make connections for our students is really important. So again, it's similar to what Cheryl showed you in that what's really important is that we make sure that we have information that goes into reporting on the social studies learning outcome, and also information that goes to reporting on the science learning outcome. So just keeping that separate in our own head is really important to make sure that we're giving a reporting in both areas. So this particular one is a combination of time and place from social, exploring the physical regions of Canada, and then the science, the earth systems, where we're looking at landforms. And this one is as if they're going on a hike. So again, as we're showing you which outcomes that are, so the outcomes that we're taking this from, you'll notice that we of course did not include all the KUSPs. That was not something that would have fit into this assessment. So we're just using partial pieces out of the KUSPs to help us to get to this assessment piece. And so again, we're going to have other activities and other learning experiences assessments that are going to meet the ones that we didn't choose for this particular one. And so in this case, it's really about, the whole idea that maybe our students, considering it's grade 2, we might read the book Going on a Bear Hunt, and we might get the kids talking about what would it be like to if we went for a walk in these particular areas or a hike in these particular areas. The grade 2 students need to spend time expanding that from their own area out to Canada. So there is more details when you go into the actual document that you can see there's more explanation than this, but just wanted to show very similar to what Cheryl did in higher grades, you can do very much the same thing in the lower grades. So even if it's not your grade level, you might want to go in and peek at the other assessments and see if there's ideas there that you can take and use to your for your students, depending on what it is you're looking for. And so we've got that table of what was the land looking like, what will it feel like when you're there, so that climate, what natural items might you find there, because there is conversation about natural resources in our KUSPs. And so that particular thing of working together with our students to build that. And then what can they do from there? We could stop it at that and have our students actually do a recreation of that. And they've spent time building it. They're making sure that they understand which ones this is a for example, so they don't have to do all of these particular regions. But we've chosen our regions that our students are going to work at, and maybe after we build it, we give them a chance to see if they can remember what things went into that sort of thing. They also could use that chart to help them to create the assessment piece, which is to tell a story. And so get the kids to maybe use that mentor text. This is where we might even take a part of a learning outcome from the ELAL and have them write a little story or share a story. But in their story, we're looking for 3 landforms across Alberta, 3 physical regions that go in Canada. Those, of course, can overlap because landforms are part of physical regions. And then they need to do some illustration of some clothing to help them think about what they would wear when they're there. Similar to what Cheryl shared with one of the earlier grades is that whole idea of this rubric might be more of that for learning, so we can give some feedback to our students to help them grow and learn from this, but thinking about where their strengths and their stretches lie when they're working through this. So again, these documents that we've shared with you, again, we've chosen to give them to you in a format that you can make a copy of, and then it's got a starting place for you, and you go in and make it your own from there. So you might change things out and put things in differently, but definitely would give you a starting place for that.
The social studies toolkit is full of resources when you get a chance to look into it all. Both of the pieces that we shared with you today are listed in the assessment section, of course, but please check out all of the foundational knowledge, the resources, the planning documents, and we really do encourage you to reach out. The work that you do is so important, and it is challenging and exciting, and we just really want you to know that you're not alone. And we hope that we can use some of these resources as a a starting place, and we can work together to design some really great learning experiences for your students. And we want to make it as enjoyable and as good for you as possible. So there's the QR code again to the toolkit, and we hope that you will find it useful. We will be staying on and happy to talk with you or answer some questions or take any feedback that you have. It's really, really helpful to us if you would fill out the survey, please. We do get the results anonymously, of course, but anything that you offer to us will help us to improve our work and help us become better at the work that we do for you. And so please grab the QR code on your phone. It shouldn't take too long. And we're grateful for that. So thank you very much.
And like Cheryl said, we're here to answer questions, so feel free to unmute if you want to throw something in the chat. And we definitely would love to, talk through some situations or things that you're thinking about already, if that's where you're at. So please do make sure that you connect with us.
Our email addresses are there, and you'll receive an email with the slide deck and the recording very soon from the consortium. So we can put the survey into the chat. Good idea. Thank you for that. Just grab that for you. Okay, with that, I think we will close out the recording and wish you a very wonderful start up to your school year. Thanks so much for being here with us today or for catching the recording later on. We will see you. See you soon.
Hi.
Thank you, Kathy, for being my partner on this one.
Yes, thank you.